Welcome to the Calvary Church Podcast, where we strive to lead people into an overflowing life with Jesus. Join us as we explore inspiring messages, engaging stories, and thought-provoking conversations that uplift your spirit and deepen your faith. Whether you're at home, on the go, or anywhere in between, we're glad you're here. Let's dive in.
Welcome, everyone, to this week's bonus episode of the Calvary Church Podcast. We're doing these episodes in between our messages as we're walking through the series Heaven Bound. And today we are blessed to have with us Dr. Bob Eby. Did I get Eby?
Eby, yeah.
Eby,
exactly.
yeah. I was making sure. Dr. Bob Eby from Assembly's of God Theological Seminary, Evangel University in Springfield, Missouri. And we're blessed to have. Having gone to college out there, you got to get the Missouri. They add the A instead of the I guess. But we're blessed to have him with us today, and we're going to be talking through this topic of heaven, which is oftentimes confusing, complicated, and really the goal of these bonus episodes is to provide a little bit of an academic input into our understanding of heaven, not just what culture tells us about heaven or what it should be, but what Scripture says. So, any introductions you want to share?
Well, this is a theme that we find so pronounced in important passages in the New Testament, and I think it's a valuable and necessary conversation, and maybe more so because it's been muddied up by a lot of confusing stuff that's gotten thrown into it. So to have these conversations, to think of them in the light of Scripture, is so critical in our world. I'm so glad you're doing this in the context of your local church, having these conversations. We need them.
Thank you. I appreciate that. I think it's going to be really valuable. So to kind of start things off, how does that kind of piggyback on what you just said, but how does the biblical view of heaven, understanding of heaven, differ from maybe the cultural understanding of heaven?
And we say not only cultural, but I would say the church cultural world.
Yeah.
The society as a whole has a view, but the church has, and the amazing thing to me is how confused, muddled, and kind of syncretized with the ideas of the world our view of heaven has become even in the church. And so what's the difference between the biblical view and the cultural view? I would say not least of which is that I found before I even came to the university and the seminary to teach, I was continually challenged that people viewed heaven through this lens that's pushed in greeting cards and artwork and all of these things that heaven's essentially floating around on a cloud, strumming in a toga with wings. And I think we can poke holes biblically in every part of that image. Every one of those things are profoundly foreign to, I think, the scriptural view of our eternal destination.
What do you think the biggest gap is? What do you think the biggest difference is between what culturally in the church and outside of the church, which I think in the church we've adopted a lot of the understanding of heaven from outside the church and made it Scripture, which it isn't. What do you think the gap or the biggest difference is between that and what Scripture actually teaches?
Several things, I think. I don't know that I can come up with just one, but I'll give a couple. One, I think this idea of heaven being a disembodied existence for humanity. And I think that is a foreign concept to biblical understanding of anthropology. So we think of anthropology as being the field. I think in our culture, we think of anthropology as a discipline akin to like, or alongside of and correlated with like archaeology and different things like that. But anthropology is also a theological category. It's a theological discipline that we're going to draw our insights from Scripture. And a biblical anthropology is far different than this anthropology that presents to us disembodied spirits. And that comes from a variety of lenses. Historically, it comes from a Greek view, the Hellenistic culture that really was prevalent throughout the New Testament world, is a world that longed for disembodied existence.
Yeah.
And that's shaped our view of it. I also think you get that disembodied view even in some of the Eastern frameworks that say we want to shed individual existence. Now, that may be bigger than just losing embodiment, but it certainly encompasses the framework of losing embodiment. And I think that is incredibly disappointing, because that is missing one of the sacred realities about our human existence, purposed and declared by God. And so I think that disembodied element of heaven, I think there's often confusion as well, that heaven is thought of in the way that it is a different spatial location.
Like we go up to heaven.
Yes.
Like we're gonna like die or one day just float up to heaven, like it's a entirely different place.
Exactly. And that is emphatically, and I'm sure we're going to get into this conversation.
Yeah, bet.
But we've missed this reality that our eternal destination is not somewhere further out than Pluto, right? It is it's the new heaven and the new earth. And that failure to recognize that is part of the failure to recognize our embodiedness as humanity, but also the nature and the purpose of creation as revealed through the entirety of the Bible.
Yeah.
From Genesis 1 all the way through Revelation 22, this idea that creation has a purpose, and it's not just that we're going to float out into outer space, and that's a myth. Another myth that I think culturally has been brought into this is that, I don't know how many times as a pastor I was handed, pastor at a funeral, would you read this poem for my departed loved one? And the poem would essentially go along the lines of, they're an angel now. To which I wanted to just, number one, weep, because I clearly failed them as their pastor in good teaching. Two, pull my hair out, because maybe they just weren't listening, even if we were teaching it. We don't change our being. We don't become angels as this piece of heaven. The other thing is, so much of the language of Scripture, which we've already alluded to about heaven, is creating for us visual mental images, metaphors, to help us to understand something profound at a level we can understand. But when we force it into a literalness that the Scripture writer did not even intend, they knew it was metaphor, they intended it to be metaphor. When we force it too literally, then we create some weirdness in our view of heaven.
Yeah, and there's so much symbolism, especially in Revelation, of the picture of heaven, of what heaven is supposed to look like. How do we interpret, process that symbolism and know what's symbolic and what's literal?
And Revelation is notoriously difficult on that, right? And to be honest, I can't give a succinct, simple answer. Well, no, in fact,
you can't go verse by verse and say this is symbolic and that's not. Like, who are we to do that, right?
No, because the very nature, the very genre of the text itself was very well known in the ancient world. Apocalyptic literature in Judaism was prevalent from the end of the Old Testament to the beginning of the New Testament, which we typically now in scholarship call the Second Temple period. When I was a kid and you'd hear people, we'd call it the intertestamental. You might hear it referred to more often now as the Second Temple period. In the rise of the Greek Empire and its influence into the land and the people of Israel and Judah, there is an enormous amount of catastrophic suffering that takes place. and they begin to write their hope-filled expressions in a different genre, which we know as apocalyptic, which is related to the prophetic, but is profoundly more visionary. It's filled with symbols, esoteric symbols that are far removed from just everyday life. It's fantastical creatures and jewels and numbers and beasts and animals and all of these things, with the intention to elicit a sense of hope in the midst of hopelessness. That's when apocalyptic literature rises in its significance. And it's just foreign to us. We don't have a category really like that today. So when we read it, we miss things that cultures that were immersed and understood the rules of the genre better. We don't know the rules real well. Now, that being said, there are symbols, there are images, there are fantastical realities. Everything in the text means something, and it means something of great import. Discerning what is giving us image to evoke something. So, for example, I'm not saying that heaven is not entered through giant pearl gates. Okay. I'm not saying it's not. That will freak people out if I say that. But what I am saying is that whether there are physical pearl gates, the image it's evoking is regal, it's majestic, it's powerful. And remember, Revelation is written to a very small, marginalized group of believers suffering terribly at the hands of a incomprehensibly powerful Roman Empire.
Yeah.
They had no expectation that they would, in their lifetime, that they would be freed from its control. And if you've ever been in any of the places where the Roman Empire was, where you can see the ruins of the Roman Empire, here's the thing that struck me in Rome, in some areas of Greece that I've been, and in Turkey, where you see these Roman ruins. The power of the empire is lost on us. We just read the stories, but when you see just the ruins of their 2,000-year-old structures and temples and buildings and theaters, I have been humbled that it was far more powerful than I envisioned. And so when John receives this revelation, this vision-based revelation, he's trying to capture there is coming. In fact, not just that there is coming, there is now an empire so much greater than the empire you see. That's one of the things about apocalyptic literature. It's revealing that there is what you see, but there is a truth that is transcendent to that. And so this image of heaven evokes power, wealth, authority that was set in contrast to everything they were seeing around them. And so whether the image is specifically gold streets, jewel-encrusted gates, the point is this, that whatever you struggle with, whatever you face, whatever battle you walk through, whatever, if we'll use Paul's words, principality or power you encounter, that the kingdom of which you are a part may not be immediately visible to your physical eyes, but know this, it is there, it is present, and it is greater than any foe that stands against you.
It's really good. It's really good. In those writing in Revelation specifically, especially in eschatology and end times, there's a lot written about a new heaven and new earth. How does the new heaven and a new earth, how does that kind of contrast, that concept, that idea differ from the current understanding of what heaven is the cartoons we talked about, where you're drifting up to this place with wings and halos and all. How does the concept of new heaven, new earth? I remember in Bible college, Dr. Purdy. I don't know if you knew Dr. Purdy.
Pretty miss him
Um,
great.
he was an amazing man, and he had such a unique view of this that I had as a Bible college student, I hadn't heard as a young man, but is so fascinating. I'd be interested to get your thoughts on how do you see that new heaven, new earth differing from our understanding of heaven now?
So again, everybody has this idea we're going to go out there in space and we're going to be in a never, this is my view growing up in the church. And I think many people that we're going to be on some kind of a cloud out there, disembodied, and that we will be ultimately involved in an everlasting, never ending worship service. Okay. That's kind of
Yeah.
what I had growing up.
It's shout to the Lord, right to Lord, I lift your name on high. Somewhere in celebrate Jesus, celebrate, and we're all in white robes and
That's the
lots
image.
of, yeah,
I'll be honest with you, even as a young person, there was a thought of me in my own heart, my own thought that like, I love the Lord. And as a kid, I'd think this, I love Jesus. I love his church. I actually like going to church. I don't know that I want to think of a worship service going on forever and ever. That seems like that's eventually, I know God's going to be there, but I'm afraid this is going to get boring. Okay. So here is, I think, the corrective for me. At least it's been my corrective in the light of Scripture. What is the nature of the redemptive arc of the narrative of Scripture? We begin in Genesis chapter 1 and 2, and before the fall in 3. Mankind is created. Creation is created. We have on the days of creation, the narrative in chapter 1, which is broken down by days of creation. The first 3 days are, think of it as the big containers are created, the heaven and the earth. Okay, and then you've got in days 4 through 6, you have those things filled. They're filled up. You have the animals, you have the birds, you have all of these things filling up these grand created containers. Now, God declares after each one of those, and it was good. Then he looks at all of creation and he says, it is, and when it's done, it is very good, which I think is properly understood as saying God has said of creation, this is exactly what I wanted. And there he placed within humanity and upon humanity the responsibility to be his image bearers, to draw out of creation. This is the subdue, exercise dominion, be fruitful, multiply. Theologians have called this the cultural mandate. We are to take this glorious raw material of innocent creation and bring its fullness out. But then something catastrophic happened. Sin entered. We call it the fall. And as a result of that fall, this glorious, very good creation, including humanity and creation itself, was twisted, distorted, so that the idea that humanity would never work before the fall is false. We were called to work. Our vocation to work predates the fall. What happened in the fall is that creation works against our work. We were to have relationship before the fall. Now what's happened, we have introduced conflict and competition into relationship that should have never been there. Then the rest of the arc of Scripture is God restoring that through Christ. And it's not just that we are redeemed, but Paul tells us in Romans that even creation is groaning, awaiting its redemption. And so what we find, and we have this referenced in other New Testament texts, that there's going to be a purifying of creation, but it is not going to be gone. It is going to be the fulfillment of what he purposed it to be to begin with. So now there is a new heaven and a new earth, which in some ways is going to be even better than Genesis 1, 2, and 3, because Genesis 1, 2, and 3, creation is naive and innocent and untouched. Now, in Revelation 21 and 22, the new creation has been redeemed with full knowledge of the redemptive act of Christ to bring us redemption. And that is an amazing thing, right? That now creation, this new creation. So I do believe we will still live into that cultural mandate we were given to begin with. Yes, will we glorify God? Yes, but there's this idea that we will come in and out of the gates of the city, that there will be purpose and life. I mean, I don't know exactly what all that looks like, but I do think it's this. I think we will live into our designed destiny as full image bearers, drawing fullness out of what God has created for us to live within. And I think the new heaven and the new earth be unbounded by the typical limitations, and certainly the sin-induced limitations, where we live into what he created us to be from the very beginning.
And so the new heaven and new earth is really the redemption of all of creation. It's not a we're like, taken from here to a place, but rather we are redeemed to what he
made for us.
Yeah. That's powerful.
I think we have so cheapened the nature of creation, but also our role within it. We are his image bearers in his creation. And I think the new heaven and the new earth allow us as fully redeemed creation, fully redeemed image bearers, to experience it in a way that we've never dreamed possible.
Wow.
This is not about escaping this world. It's about embracing and encountering what God purposed for us from the very beginning. It's redemption.
And N.T. Wright just came out with a new book called Surprised by Hope. I don't know if you've heard of it or read it at all, but really good. And he talks about in the book, there's two questions we're often asking. What is the hope for our world today, and what is the hope for the future? And Jesus answered both those questions and brought them together. And we are chasing one apart from the other as if they're two different questions, but they're the same question.
That is a fundamental break in our theology, a breakdown when we separate that. And I would, not to be too simplistic, but the joke in my world is always this, right? Especially in the church world, whatever the question, like when you were in Sunday school as a little kid and the teacher would ask a question, the right answer is almost always Jesus. And he is the hinge, not just of the salvation of my soul. And that's how we talk so often. No. He is the redeemer of all creation.
Yeah.
Of which we're a part.
So the based on that idea, will heaven be like, what will heaven be characterized by? Will it be a physical place, a spiritual place, some combination of, like, is it a place where we can hold something? I know I think I have the answer that you kind of hinted at already, but what's the nature of heaven?
I think it goes back to that fundamental anthropology, and it's more than anthropology; it's our cosmology as well, our understanding of the universe and of creation. And the answer to both of these things are: let's take the humanity piece. We were created as embodied beings, and there is nothing in Scripture that gives us the idea that we will or can exist ultimately as disembodied. And even the language of Scripture, we will have a glorified body. Post-resurrection, Jesus gives us, and I think it's fair we lean into this, because it says we will receive a body like unto his body. Paul goes to great length with the Corinthians battling this issue that it is not just a spiritual resurrection, it is a physical. Now, is it different? There is some element of difference, because Paul says, yeah, you sow it as a seed in this way, what grows is not, but that does not mean that it is not by some nature of definition physical. There, I think we will still be embodied beings. I think Jesus post-resurrection was embodied, but he was in a glorified body. And that body, the thing about Jesus' body is we're told that he still bore the marks of the crucifixion in his earthly life and earthly body. So
he saw the physical effects of what he had experienced, the pain he had walked through.
So there is an absolutely implied continuity between our life on earth, the body in which the tent, the tabernacle we live in, but that what our new glorified body, there is definitive continuity between those two things.
Yeah.
Now, the full nature of that continuity is probably beyond my ability to define, maybe beyond any of our ability to define.
For sure.
But there's continuity, definitive, embodied continuity between the glorified body and the mortal body we're living in.
It's good
Today.
What about relationships? When we're looking at heaven and this new heaven, this new earth, kind of what we're experiencing. Do you think we will have relationships in heaven that even come close to resembling those here on earth? And how would they be different if they are close?
I think it's a little bit of, even biblically, I think, a complicated answer, right? There we have these, this passage, will be known as we are known, which we often throw around. And but yet Jesus also alludes to the fact when they were trying to trap him, will you, whose husband will this be?
That's the most famous one. Yeah.
Now, I absolutely, this is my own personal belief in the light of Scripture. I think we will be known with, again, that persistent continuity of our being. I think that sets us apart from a lot of Eastern mystical ideas that
it's not like we're being reincarnated into another being that does no memory of the previous. That's Eastern, Hinduism. Yeah.
Still have a continuity. And I think with that continuity, our personhood is not eradicated. And God himself, even before the creation of the world, the universe, existed in relationship, right? That is the nature of the Trinity. And so if God existed and exists eternally in relationship, I think it would be silly for us to envision that we will cease to exist within or without the ability as persons to relate. So I do believe we will know people. I think, frankly, my dad went to be with the Lord 25, almost 26 years ago. I think I'll know my dad when I get to heaven. And I think he'll know me. And I think there are people that have influenced my life, and I think I will know them. And again, I don't want to push too far into this. There's this grand debate in biblical studies, the story of Lazarus and Abraham. He's in the bosom of Abraham, and what all of this means. There's debate. Is this a parable, or is it
it's the only parable that has names, right?
And that's why I think it's Jesus pulling back. I think it's revealing because of that very thing. We don't have names. Usually Jesus introduces his parables with something like, there once was a man, or there was a certain king. He doesn't do that with this parable or this narrative. And so I tend to agree with what you just said, by nature of having the names attached. And here's the reality. One of the things that comes through in that story is their personhood and being is preserved. Abraham is still Abraham in the eschaton, right? Lazarus is still Lazarus after his death. Jesus was still Jesus after his death. And Jesus related, now again, he is post-resurrection, but he still relates as personhood, with personhood, to his disciples. So I would say, in the light of all that, and then one of my favorite passages from Hebrews. So chapter 11, remember the chapter divisions are added
later.
Chapter 11 into chapter 12, we break it because we put chapters there. But where chapter 12 starts, and it says, I apologize, I grew up in Bible quiz and I memorized it in King James. So that's all I've got. Wherefore, seeing we are compassed about with so great a cloud of witnesses. If you just start in chapter 12, you don't catch who are these witnesses. The witnesses are the heroes of the faith from Hebrews 11, that they have persisted. And what the image the writer of Hebrews gives us is that they have assembled in the great theater of heaven, the great circus of heaven. And certain, that was where they had the chariot races in ancient Rome. And it's as if the Hebrew writer of Hebrews envisions this grand race in a grand circus. And he says, sitting, you can't give up your faith. You can't lose out. You can't walk away from Christ at this point, because you got to understand Abraham and Moses and all of these grand heroes of the faith, they persisted. And now they are watching and cheering you on to persist. And again, it could just be a metaphorical image, but I tend to think it's far more than a metaphorical image. I really think it is they, as who they were and who they persist in being in their existence post-resurrection or post-life is still who they were, and they're cheering for us.
I think your idea that there's continuity of your existence, I think, is very telling, and I think has a lot of is backed up a lot throughout Scripture, that concept, that idea. Last question as we kind of wrap up here, trying to stay roughly around 30 minutes here. Last question is, how does our understanding of heaven, because heaven is one of those topics that sometimes it's like the debate, like it's a topic that we might talk about, but does it really influence us? But it should. How does the hope of heaven, like genuine biblical understanding of heaven, how should that influence our Christian life today?
If for no other reason, the scripture, Paul tells us in Ephesians that we have, with the Spirit in our life today, we have the down payment of our inheritance. And I would like to think of our inheritance being inclusive of what we call heaven, or maybe even the new heaven and new earth, maybe more than that, but certainly that. And what we have today is it's not that it's completely unknown to us. It will be the unhindered sense of divine presence, but we have a foretaste of it today. And so how does it affect the way we live? Well, I think it affects the way we act, treat other people, that we shun sinfulness, not to earn God's favor, like we're earning our salvation, but we shun sinfulness and immorality and cruelty to others and selfishness. We shun that because we were made to dwell in that pure and holy state. And we are called today to live here because of the down payment of the Spirit, like we will live there. Mm-hmm. And I think that is the positive frame to understand how we should live. We should live by the rules of our ultimate dwelling. We are strangers and pilgrims here. We are citizens of a heavenly kingdom, a kingdom that is bigger than this earth. So we should live in line with that.
Yeah, that's good. It's really good.
More than that, heaven is often used as that reminder that you will stand before God. and you will give an account for your life. It has this sense of, and when we live without a sense of eternity, without a sense of that consummation of our existence, we will often forget that there is divine accountability and judgment. Paul leans that in his battle with the Corinthians in 1 Corinthians, and we should live in the light of it, not in fear as a believer, but as a sense of, I will stand before him one day, and the way I live matters here as much as it will matter when I get there.
It's really good. That's really good. Well, Dr. Eby, I so appreciate your wisdom, knowledge, and understanding. You've definitely given us things to think about and push and challenge. The understanding that infiltrates the church, that has not originated from Scripture, but originates from ancient philosophers, secular writings and understandings, but not from Scripture. And that's kind of the goal of these conversations, is to kind of reorient and bring us back to what the Bible actually says, what Scripture actually says, not just what we want to tell ourselves at a time when we lose a loved one to make ourselves feel better, which isn't actually necessarily true, that there are angels or any of that. And this has been really helpful.
Is that it's really sad that we have substituted these false images because they're popular, they're ubiquitous, they're around us all the time, for the biblical view, because when we embrace the biblical view, it's actually so much more comforting. It's actually so much more hope-filled. It is so much more than the pseudo comfort of, oh, we'll become angels and float around. No. It's so much better than that when we understand the biblical view.
Yeah, so true. As we wrap up, could you just give us real quick, if people want to get information about Assemblies of God Theological Seminary or Evangel University?
Best place to go is on the website, evangel.edu. If you're looking for information about the seminary, you can click on the link from the main homepage for Evangel University. I'd also say, for anybody that's interested and they want to increase their biblical study capacity or their preaching capacity, we are currently offering graduate level resources through the Preaching Center that we want to bring to believers, lay ministers, and even credentialed ministers through a series of cohorts that we're going to give them what would be the equivalent of probably about $3,000 of seminary education for $50. And we deal with apocalyptic literature. We deal with all these things. And if you want more information, just reach out to us here. You can use my email, ebyr@evangel.edu. And we want to serve the local church. And so thank you for that.
So grateful for you, Dr. Eby. So it's ebyr@evangel.edu. Okay, ebyr@evangel.edu. If you want to email Dr. Eby. Thank you so much for your time. I know you are a busy man, have a very packed schedule, and we really are grateful you took some time to have this conversation today.
Thank you for joining us today on the Calvary Church Podcast. We hope you found encouragement and inspiration in today's message. Remember, you are not alone on your faith journey. If you enjoyed this episode, please share it with your friends and family. And don't forget to subscribe to our podcast so you never miss an episode. For more information about our church, upcoming events, and ways to get involved, visit our website at calvaryirwin.com or follow us on social media @CalvaryIrwin. Until next time, may God bless you and keep you. Have a wonderful week.